Now we have a picture moving on to what the ground looked like in 1948. This is slightly more modern. You can see the Kent and Canterbury Hospital next door. You can see a few of the buildings on the ground. You can see the famous lime tree. You can see the comparatively small number of stands that were there then. And the ground behind, to the sort of above and to the right of the ground, is all land that at that time was owned by the club and used for various different reasons. So that's what it looked like in 1948. And by the time we move on from there, the ground has changed significantly since then, but that is only, 70 years ago, 75 years ago. And that's, quite a lot of change has happened in then, as opposed to the probably more than has happened in the first 75 years up until then. If we look at the ground now, this is basically what we've got. We've got stands around an awful lot of the ground, especially at the pavilion end. I suppose that's pretty obvious, really. But I mean, and it's a much more built-up ground than it used to be. And indeed, as we speak, I think, well, not quite as we speak because it's nighttime, but they are over this winter doing a lot more work, especially on the Woolly stand, to continuing development of the ground. So I want to walk you around the ground now and tell you a little bit about what goes on in each different part of the ground. The first thing we come to, if we're looking around the ground, is the Kennedy Gates. They were opened only last year, September 2023, and these replaced the gates, the old turnstile gates, which were on the old Dover Road, which were the main pedestrian entry for the ground. The Kennedy Gates are still the main entry for the ground, and they're named after George Kennedy, who you can see here. He was chairman of Kent for 10 years, from 2008 to 2017. He's been president of Kent as well, and he is a great benefactor to the club. And in fact, it would not be an exaggeration to say that probably without his financial support in the bad times of the financial low times of the late noughties and early teens, Kent would not have survived. So the gates are named after him, but the original gates were put up after the Second World War, and the signpost you can see here is the plaque off the original gates, which shows that it was a gate built as a memorial of those who gave their lives to the service of their country in the Second World War. Among those names, we see in particular Jerry Chalk here, who was captain of Kent pre-war and who was killed in a flying accident. And we also see another captain of Kent. Oopsie, sorry, I've gone on a line that I didn't mean to do there. Sorry about that. Geoffrey Legge here, who also was killed died in service in the Second World War. The other people here were mainly second 11 players, but still made the ultimate sacrifice, so are equally worthy to be on that list of names. If we move on from the Kennedy Gates, almost next door to it, there is a plaque which shows the other grounds that Kent used over the years. In fact, the thing about the Canterbury ground is that for most of the history of Kent, we have played more games away from Canterbury than on the Canterbury ground. There are 15 grounds listed on this plaque, and in really up until the 60s, Kent were a peripatetic side. We played in many different grounds each year, apart from Tunbridge Wells and Beckenham and Maidstone, which we played all of which we played at very recently. We played at Folkestone, we played at Dover, we played at Blackheath, we played at Gravesend, we played at many, many different places. It's only in the last few years that really we have concentrated on playing just at Canterbury and at Beckenham, which is the other in the London end of things, the other Kent ground. It is why, for example, the highest run scorer in the history of Kent at Canterbury is Rob Key, a fairly recent player. And despite the fact that he is not anywhere near the top run scorer of Kent for Kent on all grounds, at Canterbury he is, because he played there more than anybody else. And of course, he's a very fine batsman. The concentration of cricket at Canterbury has become more and more pronounced as the years go by, for a variety of reasons, mainly involving the upkeep of the outgrounds, the fact that they aren't owned by us, and because these days the county championship depends on runs on points being deducted if the pitch is not up to the right standard and things like this. It means that if we don't own the ground, it's very difficult to be sure that the ground is going to be up to the standard required for first-class cricket, and therefore it's very difficult to move to these places. That's the reason we don't play at the Moat in Maidstone anymore. It's the reason that we're almost not playing at Tunbridge Wells at the moment. We would love to get back to them as soon as we can. And it's the reason why even clubs like Folkestone, who have done an awful lot to improve themselves over the last few years, and others, it's very difficult for us to go there. It's also quite expensive to do too much moving around the ground. You have to take all the advertising hoardings with you and that sort of stuff. So that's how many grounds we've played at, and I should say it's more than almost any other cricket club. The lime tree is now gone. This is the next thing we come round to as we walk around the ground, and it was already there in the 1840s when we first moved to use this as a cricket ground. And there, as a result of that, many great Victorian players, from Alfred Minn, known as the Lion of Kent, and Fuller Pilch, the first groundsman here, and also a great batsman, and of course W.G. Grace, who still holds the record for the highest score ever made at Canterbury, 344. They all played under the shade of the tree, but it's gone now. It was, for most of the time there, the only tree in county cricket which sometimes stood within the playing area. And you can see from this picture here that the tree in this Canterbury Week shot, I'm not sure exactly when this is from, but I think the 70s, the boundary line is beyond the cricket, beyond the tree. If it became a challenge for batters to clear it, if it was successful, if you successfully cleared it, then it was worth 6 runs. But if your shot just touched a leaf right at the topmost bough of the tree, then that counted as only 4. So it was really, and if you just clattered it straight through the tree, then that was also only a 4, however high it went, and whether or not it went over the boundary subsequently. It was very difficult to do, and there's only 3 people who are known for sure to have done this. The great Leary Constantine, the West Indian all-rounder, in 1928, playing for the West Indies against Kent. And actually 3 years earlier, a chap called Jacko Watson, playing for Sussex against Kent in 1925, was the first legitimate one to have done it, or the first certain to have done it. And then the last one was Carl Hooper, the West Indian, playing for Kent in 1992. It was his first home game, and he just clipped it off his toes straight over the tree. And at that point, people thought, this is a good signing we've made for Kent. But they're the only people who have definitely cleared the tree. And of course, there won't be any more because, firstly, that tree is no more. And secondly, the tree is no longer in the playing area. So this is what happened to the lime tree after the great storm of January 2005. This was all that was left of it. and it was blown down. And the stories that the committee were desperately trying to push hard as the wind blew to make sure it went down are totally untrue. The tree was dying, and we were very worried that it would fall down during the summer season and cause injury. But fortunately, it fell down in a storm in the middle of January, or in January the 7th, I think. So it was just the anniversary of a few days ago, the anniversary of the tumbling down of that tree. So all that was left of it was that stump, which was dug up, and of course, apart from enough wood to make an awful lot of souvenirs. It's a bit like the pieces of the True Cross, the number of pieces of lime tree there are which have been turned into souvenirs. Going on round the ground, we see Freeman House, which is a retirement flats which were completed, I can't remember, about 2016, 2017, something like that. And they are fully occupied. They're named after Titch Freeman, Percy Freeman, the great leg spin bowler, who is the only person ever to have taken 300 wickets in a season. He was a remarkable cricketer. This also, here you can see the little lime tree, which is the replacement lime tree, but that will always be outside the playing area, because we can't, if we went outside it, we would be in the grounds of the flats. This photo was taken during a England v Australia women's test match. Going on round the ground, the next place we come to is the Blythe Memorial. Now, this was originally quite near where the Kennedy Gates now are, and the sort of entry to where Freeman House now is. Colin Blythe was the supreme bowler of his era, and he was killed in 1917 in Ypres in the First World War, and the club put up this memorial, which was originally a drinking fountain, to him, and the caption there basically says it all. He was loved by all his fellow cricketers and was a supreme player. He liked to bowl in a cap, as you will note from that picture there, and he was an epileptic, and he didn't have to volunteer for the war, but he did, and was killed on the front at Ypres in 1917, November 1917. But a great player. Now, the Blythe Memorial is now currently almost behind the Leslie Ames stand. Now, the Leslie Ames stand is the oldest still standing structure on the ground. It was built in 1897, the year after Kent bought the ground, and it was originally called the Iron Stand because it was made of iron. It was built by the Blackwall Galvanized Iron Company. I don't know what happened to them, but the stand is still going strong. It was also known as the Ladies' Pavilion because, of course, no ladies were obviously allowed into the main pavilion in those days. So that's where they went. Many people would say it's a better view than you get from the pavilion, and probably more congenial. The stand has been refurbished a few times. It has one of the only, maybe the only, manually operated scoreboards still on the county circuit. And it was renamed for Leslie Ames in 1973. Leslie Ames is probably, Kent had produced so many great wicketkeepers, it's difficult to say he was the best of them all. But certainly as a wicketkeeper batsman, he was the best. He played for Kent for 25 years. He scored 102 first-class hundreds, one of 3 Kent players to have scored 100 hundreds. He has the highest batting average of any of those players, actually, the second highest being Colin Cowdrey, and the third being Frank Woolley, the 3 people after whom stands are named at Canterbury. He achieved the wicketkeeper's double of 1,000 runs and 100 dismissals in a season 3 times, which is pretty rare. and mainly off the bowling of Titch Freeman, he stumped 64 people in 1932, which is a record that will probably stand forever. Anyone who does 10 stumpings a year these days is regarded as a super wicketkeeper. And you wonder about those batsmen in the 1930s, when facing Titch Freeman, why they thought they should jump out and try and whack him back over his head when they knew that quite probably the lightning hands of Leslie Ames awaited them if they missed the ball. Going on round, I'm going to miss out, partly because it's extremely boring architecturally, the Ames Levitt Indoor School, which was named after Leslie Ames again, and Hopper Levitt, another England wicketkeeper. He was an interesting man. He liked to party, shall we say, and known as Hopper Levitt. The story goes that in one game, he went to a party at the end of the first day's play, and when the second day's play began, he was nowhere to be seen. People rushed down round to his apartment and discovered him lying on the bed, fast asleep in his full dinner outfit, DJ and black tie and everything. They picked him up, rushed him to the ground, put him through the shower, dressed him up in his kit, put on his pads and wicketkeeping gloves, and virtually carried him out to the centre of the ground to play. First ball was bowled with him as wicketkeeper. The batsman played forward, got a lovely little nick, went straight through, very close to the wicketkeeper, who did not move, not one little inch. Second ball, exactly the same thing, except that the batsman nicked it a bit harder and it went a little bit wider, so that it was really a catch that first slip or second slip even should take. Hopper Levitt suddenly leapt up, threw himself to his right, took a brilliant one-handed catch, and everybody rushed around him and said, "Hopper, that was fantastic." And he said, "Yes, and off the first ball of the day too." So he was quite a gentleman. Next to that stand, the Ames Levitt Indoor School, is the Cowdrey stand. This is the most recent big stand to have been built. It was built in 1986. It cost us £600,000, and it was named 6 years later for Colin Cowdrey. Colin Cowdrey doesn't need much introduction, but I will nevertheless bore you with some of this stuff. He captained Kent for 15 seasons, longer than anyone except his fellow Lord Harris, who also led the county for 15 seasons. And of course, the Cowdrey family, in the person of Chris Cowdrey and Graham Cowdrey, his sons, and Fabian Cowdrey, his grandson, have all played for Kent. He was one of these players that it was just a joy to watch batting. He was a very, very good batsman. He was also a phenomenal slip fielder. He had incredibly fast reactions, hand-eye coordination, which made him a brilliant slip fielder. But he had flat feet and was invalided out of doing his national service because of flat feet. These days, he would probably not get into a side for being too unfit. That would have been a great loss to cricket in every way. One of the rooms in the top room of the Cowdrey stand is named after Lord Harris. Look, you can't talk about the history of this ground without mentioning Lord Harris. He was the Lord High Everything of Kent. We've already talked about the fact that he commissioned the painting of Kent v Lancashire 1906, but he was on the original committee when the club was formed in 1870, when he was only 19. When he was 24, he was president. In that same year, he was secretary and he was captain. So basically, he did everything. Excuse me. In 1875, he was secretary for 5 years. He was captain for 15 seasons. He was chairman for 45 years. And he was chairman of the Young Players Subcommittee, which basically was what became the Cricket Committee, for 35 years. So, excuse me, I must have a glass of water. He ruled the club with an iron hand. At the same time, not quite at the same time, he was also governor of Bombay, and was out in India for a few years. And he was president of MCC and a member of the committees. He was an England selector and a member of various MCC committees for many years. So he was the power, and anything he did without his say-so, nothing happened. The picture you see there, it was actually painted by Albert Chevalier Taylor, and is how Harris got to know him in the first place. Next to the Cowdrey is the Woolley stand. The Woolley stand is named after Frank Woolley. It was built in 1927, replacing a wooden structure which was known as the telegraph stand. It cost about £6,000 to build, which would be about £300,000 today. Originally, it held over 1,500 spectators. I don't think it quite holds that number now, but unless you all breathe in. But it is the biggest stand on the ground. It's one of the world's largest cantilevered buildings in the world when it opened, and might even be the largest now. It's certainly one of the very oldest concrete stands still in operation. It was known as the concrete stand. They're very good at naming. We had the iron stand and the concrete stand. It was so romantic names are something that the Kent Club were very good at in the early 20th century. But in 1973, it was renamed in honor of Frank Woolley. And it had further refurbishment in the last couple of years, costing at least as much as it cost to build it originally. And there's work going on at the moment in the Woolley stand to build a few extra bits and pieces, a few extra rooms that are needed under the new wonderful ECB rules. So Frank Woolley himself, in my view, is the greatest all-rounder that ever lived, better than Sobers, but I've seen Sobers play and I never saw Frank Woolley play. But he scored more runs and more hundreds and more catches than any other Kent player. He took more wickets than all but 4 players of Kent. He played in 52 consecutive tests for England between 1909 to 1926. He was in the side permanently for all that time. And he was apparently, just watching him bat was a spectacle that you didn't really matter what happened. It was just so beautiful, so graceful. And if you can imagine, I suppose David Gower would be about the nearest in even vaguely recent times as a left-handed stylist. Most left-handers are rather sort of effective rather than stylish. You think about Alistair Cook and people like this. But Frank Woolley was not only effective, but he was very graceful indeed. He lived to a very good age, and he spent his last few years in Canada, but he came over to England occasionally, especially for the opening of his stand. And here we see a picture of him, Cowdrey, Ames, and Woolley, the three Kent players who have scored 100 hundreds. This was the day that the Woolley stand was named in his honor.